What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? That question echoed like a half-remembered dream in Frank Dalton's head as he sat alone at the small kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator competing with the low mumble of the television in the background. The clock on the wall ticked with robotic consistency, marking time like a countdown. The smell of reheated chili drifted from the bowl in front of him, but Frank barely noticed. He held his spoon without moving, staring at the flickering screen where a news anchor was enthusiastically talking about something called Loop Phase 3. The words, "The Boring Company," flashed across the bottom of the screen, followed by a clip of Elon Musk standing in front of a glowing tunnel. "This isn't just a project," Elon said, voice steady, gaze unwavering. "It's a complete reinvention of how we move people through cities. I don't care how long it takes. We're going to build it. Period." Frank blinked slowly. Something about the man's tone, the unapologetic certainty in his voice, made the spoon fall softly into the bowl with a dull clink. The tunnel behind Musk on the screen looked like something out of a science fiction movie, but here it was, real, humming with light and energy and forward motion. Frank looked around his kitchen. The faded wallpaper curled at the edges. A grease stain on the ceiling hadn't changed in years. Dust collected in corners. The silence in the house had weight now. It pressed down on him, reminding him of how long it had been since someone knocked on his door without needing something. He used to drive buses, 39 years through the same winding neighborhoods, rain or shine. Now, the only engine he heard was the occasional car outside. The world had moved on. His wife, Helen, had passed 5 years ago. The kids were grown, scattered across the country, too busy with their own lives to call regularly. He tried not to blame them. After all, hadn't he done the same thing to his own father? Still, the ache of invisibility was worse than any back pain. He grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. The segment continued, showing a time-lapse of a tunnel being built under Los Angeles. Musk was speaking again, "The only way to go is forward. And if no one is building that path, then dig it yourself." Frank felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Not joy exactly. Not inspiration. More like irritation, like being poked by a memory. In the garage, under an old tarp and behind stacks of unused paint cans, sat a wooden crate filled with blueprints, sketches, and notebooks. Designs he'd drawn in his 20s and 30s, back when he thought he might go to school for engineering. Back when he believed he could build something that mattered. He had been good with his hands. His old shop teacher used to call him the problem solver. But life didn't leave much room for solving problems that didn't pay the bills. One kid came, then another. Helen went back to work nights. Frank took the bus job. It was stable. Predictable. Practical. The dreams, like the blueprints, got packed away. He stood up slowly, his knees creaking in protest. The bowl of chili remained untouched. As he shuffled toward the hallway, he paused, turning back to glance at the TV. Elon was still talking, this time in front of a group of young engineers who hung on every word. "We don't stop because we're tired," he said. "We stop when we're done." Frank snorted. Easy to say when you've got billions. But the thought didn't carry weight. It was a shield, and he knew it. What had he stopped doing just because he was tired? How many things had he abandoned without even trying? In the hallway mirror, his reflection startled him. When had he gotten so gray? So hunched? His eyes, once bright blue and filled with plans, now looked muted, like a photo left too long in the sun. Still, something behind them sparked tonight. Not fire. Not yet. But maybe a flicker. He turned and walked slowly into the garage. The air was musty, filled with the scent of old oil and time. He pulled the chain for the single overhead bulb, which buzzed before flooding the space with tired yellow light. The crate was where he remembered. He moved aside the tarp and knelt down, groaning softly as his knees bent. Inside were the dreams of another life. Diagrams of a more efficient bus engine. Notebooks filled with route optimization plans for the Detroit public system. One sketch, frayed at the corners, showed an underground tunnel, his idea for bypassing surface congestion. It looked primitive compared to Musk's vision, but the bones were there. He stared at it for a long moment. What if it wasn't about being rich? What if it wasn't about age or fame or money? What if it was just about refusing to stop? Refusing to accept that your story had to end quietly? Maybe that's what Musk had figured out, that you don't have to wait for someone to hand you the next chapter. You write it. You build it. You dig it yourself. The cold of the concrete floor seeped through his pants, but Frank didn't notice. For the first time in years, he felt like he was someplace he belonged. Surrounded by ideas. Surrounded by pieces of himself he'd almost forgotten. There was no music. No cheering crowd. No sudden revelation. Just a man sitting on the floor of his garage, holding a paper from another life and wondering what would happen if he stopped waiting. On the workbench, the radio hadn't worked in a decade, but he turned the knob anyway. A crackle of static. Then silence. Then music. Bowie. Changes. Frank laughed softly, the sound foreign in the stillness. That was Helen's favorite. He stood, knees screaming, but determination overriding pain. He walked to the bench and cleared a space. Tomorrow, he'd clean the garage. Maybe open a notebook. Maybe sketch something. He didn't know what yet. But he knew this, he wasn't done. Not even close. His hand lingered over a rusty wrench. He picked it up, ran a thumb along the cold metal, and slipped it into his pocket. Like a totem. Like a promise. Maybe he'd build something. Maybe not. But he'd try. And maybe, just maybe, someone would notice. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The garage smelled like dust, oil, and the soft decay of forgotten years. Frank Dalton stood in the middle of it, not moving, not speaking, just breathing in the space he had once treated like a second home and had long since abandoned to memory and disuse. The wrench in his pocket was a reminder, cold and solid, that maybe he wasn't done after all. But that spark, that quiet promise, didn't come out of nowhere. It had been buried under decades of days that looked the same, under layers of routine so thick and familiar he'd stopped even seeing them. There was a time when Frank used to imagine entire cities reshaped by ideas that came out of his head. When he was 15, his science fair project had won first place at the county level. A redesigned suspension system for school buses that could absorb potholes without jarring the passengers. The local paper called him Young Engineer on the Rise. His mom framed the article. His father didn't say much. He never said much. Frank learned early that dreaming was something you did quietly, without drawing too much attention. His dad worked in a tool and die shop, came home dirty and tired, and expected Frank to do the same when the time came. Engineering school was mentioned once. Laughed off. Don't need a degree to turn a wrench, his father had said. Frank didn't argue. He never did. He just folded the paper up and tucked it inside his algebra book. At 17, he met Helen. She wore yellow dresses and had a laugh that cracked like a bell. She was studying to be a nurse. Frank thought she was the bravest person he'd ever met. When her mother got sick, Helen dropped out to take care of her full-time. Frank never forgot that. They got married at 22. Frank had just started driving buses for the city, thinking it was temporary. Something to get him by until the big idea came, until the sketch that would change everything was noticed. But then Sarah was born. Then James. Then Lucy. Frank took extra shifts. He knew every turn and pothole in Detroit like the veins on the back of his hand. He knew which passengers would try to sneak on without paying and which would bring him cookies at Christmas. He became part of the city's rhythm. Reliable. Predictable. Unchanging. The sketches kept piling up in notebooks and manila folders that Helen never questioned. She'd sometimes walk into the garage with a mug of coffee, kiss him on the cheek, and ask, "What are we building today, genius?" He never answered. Not really. Because building something meant taking a risk, stepping away from stability, and Frank wasn't sure he knew how. Then the kids got older. They needed school supplies, braces, driving lessons. Frank's world shrank to paychecks and routes and making sure everyone had what they needed. He told himself there'd be time later. But time didn't keep its promises. Helen got sick first. Breast cancer. They fought it hard. For 3 years, they fought with everything they had, but in the end, it wasn't enough. The house got quieter. The kids came around less often. Sarah moved to Denver. Lucy to Baltimore. James stayed close, but work kept him busy, and their conversations turned into updates and weather reports. Frank retired early, more out of necessity than choice. The days afterward were a blur of silence, punctuated by grocery runs and doctor visits. His hands still wanted to build something, but the garage was too quiet, and his back too stiff. The world felt like it had passed him by. Phones were smarter than he was. Cars drove themselves. Teenagers on the news were starting billion-dollar companies in their bedrooms. Frank started to believe he had simply missed the window. His moment had come and gone while he wasn't looking. Then one day, he came across an old VHS tape in the hall closet while cleaning. It was labeled, Frank, Route Interview 1987. Curious, he dug out the VCR, blew the dust off, and popped it in. The screen flickered to life, showing a younger version of himself, maybe in his mid-30s, being interviewed by a local cable reporter. "What do you love most about driving the bus?" she asked. Frank, smiling and confident, replied without hesitation, "I love solving puzzles. Traffic is a living thing, you have to outthink it. And I love knowing every shortcut, every alley, every way to get someone where they need to be, no matter what." The screen went black. Frank stared at it, unsure how to process what he'd just seen. That man, that version of himself, still lived somewhere inside him. He just hadn't heard from him in a while. A few days later, a neighbor named Terry dropped by to borrow a ladder. Terry was in his 30s, worked in tech, and always seemed in a hurry. But that afternoon, they ended up talking for almost an hour. Terry mentioned that Elon Musk had released a new video about underground tunnels and smart transportation grids. "It's wild," he said. "I mean, he's literally digging under entire cities to fix traffic. Guy's not afraid of anything." Frank had shrugged then, but the name stayed in his head. That night, he looked it up. Elon Musk. Boring company. Tunnels. The video autoplayed, and Frank sat through the whole thing. Then another. And another. The man had vision, sure. But more than that, he had nerve. He was willing to look ridiculous. To be told, "You can't," and do it anyway. Frank didn't envy the billions. He envied the belief. The certainty. The refusal to stop. The refusal to wait for permission. It reminded him of something Helen used to say when he hesitated over his ideas. "If you're waiting for someone to crown you a genius, honey, you'll be in your grave before the trumpet sounds." She'd said it with love, but also with challenge. And maybe now, all these years later, that trumpet was finally sounding, quietly, in the form of a news segment and a familiar ache in his chest. Not a heart attack. Something else. Something older. Something waking up. He looked around his kitchen again. The worn linoleum. The magnets on the fridge, some missing their color. The chair across from him, always empty now. How many more years would look exactly like this one if he didn't do something? Anything. He thought about that night again, the one from years ago, when he and Helen had stayed up until 3 in the morning building a prototype for an automatic ramp system to help elderly passengers board buses more easily. They'd laughed so much. It had never gone anywhere, of course. But for a few weeks, they'd believed. And belief had changed the air around them. He wanted that again. Even if just for himself. Even if just in a small, dusty garage behind a house no one visited anymore. He wanted to believe in something again. That was the truth. Not in Elon Musk. Not in tunnels or blueprints or TED Talks. But in himself. In the fact that maybe he had something left. Something more than fading memories and fading photographs. That night, after the videos were done playing, Frank didn't turn off the TV right away. He let it cast a soft glow across the dark kitchen as he sat there, hands folded, staring out the window. A car passed by, headlights sweeping across the yard, and then it was quiet again. But something had shifted. Something small. Like a stone rolling slightly out of place at the edge of a hill, waiting for gravity to do the rest. He didn't say anything. There was no grand pronouncement. Just a man sitting alone, aware that something in him had quietly moved, and that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to follow where it might lead. Frank Dalton woke to the same creak of the old wooden floorboards that he had come to know as the soundtrack of his mornings, but today something was different. The house felt heavier, almost weighting. He shuffled to the kitchen, the cold linoleum underfoot a familiar reminder of years gone by, and brewed coffee like always, but his mind churned with questions he had long buried beneath the routine. Is it too late? The question echoed in his head like a stubborn echo from the past. He poured a cup and stared at the dark liquid, swirling it absent-mindedly as the words came back. Is it too late to build? To change? To matter? He thought about Elon Musk, the man whose words had stirred something dormant inside him. Musk wasn't young, but he wasn't old either. He was relentless, fearless, and unyielding. What did that mean for a man like Frank, 72, with creaking knees, a fading memory, and a garage full of blueprints that smelled like yesterday? Was this the moment to try again, or just a foolish dream that would make him a joke to his family? His daughter Sarah had always been practical. When he called last week, she'd asked gently, "Dad, are you okay? You sound different." Frank had tried to brush it off, but the silence that followed told him she was worried. "Maybe you should slow down," the doctor had said during his last checkup. "Your heart's a bit irregular. Take it easy. You don't want to push yourself." "Easy," Frank repeated under his breath. Easy felt like giving up. He poured another cup of coffee and glanced at the TV, which was playing a morning talk show. The host mentioned a viral clip of Elon Musk talking about digging tunnels through doubt and fear. Frank smiled weakly. Musk made it sound simple, like a battle cry, but Frank's battle was inside, a war with every excuse his mind could muster. "You're too old. What do you think your kids will say? Who cares about a man in his 70s chasing a pipe dream?" He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. The voices inside him weren't new, but today they were louder, sharper, more insistent. Frank's wife, Helen, used to tell him that the hardest opponent you'd ever face was yourself. Now, he understood what she meant. He thought about the silence in his house. The coldness of the empty rooms. The years of "I'll do it tomorrow" that had stretched into decades. But then there was Musk, standing in a dusty tunnel with light shining from the end, saying, "You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when you're done." The phrase echoed. Not a mantra. A challenge. Could Frank finish something? Could he even start? The thought of calling his kids and telling them he wanted to build again felt both terrifying and necessary. What if they thought he was crazy? What if they laughed or ignored him? He reached for his phone but didn't dial. Instead, He searched for Elon's latest podcast on his cracked laptop, the screen dim and smeared with fingerprints. Musk's voice filled the room, confident and steady. Failures are just lessons in disguise. The secret is to keep going. Age doesn't define innovation, passion does. Frank felt a spark flicker inside, but then it was smothered by a wave of doubt. What if passion wasn't enough? What if his heart gave out before he could build anything meaningful? His doctor's warning loomed large. The inner war raged on, between hope and fear, between the past and a future that seemed both impossible and necessary. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked sharply, breaking the quiet. Frank glanced out the window, watching a group of teenagers skateboarding down the street, laughing and fearless. He remembered when he used to feel like that, invincible in his youth, certain he could change the world. Now, his world felt smaller, defined by limits instead of possibilities. But Musk's tunnel project wasn't just about transportation. It was about breaking barriers, defying expectations, refusing to be confined by the rules others set. Maybe Frank's own tunnel was inside him, a path through self-doubt, regret, and silence. Maybe he had to dig it himself. He stood up, knees cracking in protest, and walked slowly to the garage. The light flickered overhead as he opened the door, revealing a tomb of forgotten ideas. The crates, dusty and neglected, stared back at him. He pulled out a notebook and flipped through pages filled with calculations, sketches, and dreams. Some were rough, others surprisingly detailed. Each one a testament to a younger man's hope and skill. He ran his fingers over the paper, feeling a connection that time hadn't erased. But then came the hardest question: what now? Could he turn these papers into something real? Could he find the strength to push through his fears? The voice inside whispered, "No one is watching. No one cares." But Musk's words returned, "When you're told you can't, remember you can." Frank's fingers tightened around the notebook. Maybe it was time to stop listening to the voices that said no. Maybe it was time to listen to the ones that said yes. He thought about the possibility of failure, the embarrassment, the loneliness. But worse than failure was the thought of never trying, of fading quietly into nothingness. The morning passed in a blur. Frank called Sarah and left a message, something simple: "Dad's working on something. Would love to talk." The silence that followed was unbearable. Later that afternoon, his doctor called with test results. His heart was stable for now, but the irregularity remained. "Take it slow," the nurse said gently. Frank promised he would, but in the back of his mind, he was already planning. Planning to make a small change. To try one thing. Maybe start walking every day, like Musk said about persistence. Maybe open a blog to share his story. Maybe even pick up a wrench again. The conflict wasn't over. The war inside him was far from won. But for the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope, a thread of light weaving through the shadows. Frank's journey had only just begun. The question was no longer, "Is it too late?" but, "What will I do now?" Frank Dalton woke early the next morning with a strange mixture of nerves and determination tightening his chest. The night had been restless, his mind racing between doubts and daring thoughts, but when sunlight crept through the kitchen window, it felt like an invitation to try, to take that first step beyond all the years of waiting. He pulled on an old jacket, the one with frayed cuffs he hadn't worn in months, and headed outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and distant exhaust fumes from passing cars. He started walking, slow at first, each footfall a reminder that his body wasn't as young as it used to be, but with every step, he felt a small flicker of life returning, a sensation he hadn't known in years. The streets of his Detroit neighborhood were quiet, empty of the usual midday hustle, and as Frank walked past faded storefronts and cracked sidewalks, memories flickered, afternoons spent playing stickball, bus stops where he'd shared stories with strangers, the laughter of Helen echoing like a ghost. But today, he wasn't just a man wandering the past, he was a man moving towards something new. On his second day, Frank pulled out a worn notebook from the garage shelf, the one full of sketches and unfinished ideas. He sat on the porch steps and scribbled out a plan, not a grand design, but a simple list of goals, starting small. Walk 20 minutes daily. Reach out to Sarah. Share story online. The act of writing felt unfamiliar but powerful, like turning thoughts into promises. His phone buzzed with a message from Terry, the neighbor who had first mentioned Elon Musk's tunnels. "Hey Frank, saw you out walking. Keep it up. If you want, I can help set up that blog you mentioned." The offer caught Frank off guard. He wasn't used to help or encouragement, life had been a solo battle for too long. But something in Terry's tone was genuine, hopeful. That afternoon, with Terry's patient guidance over the phone, Frank created a simple blog titled Frank's Tunnel. The first post was raw and honest. "I'm 72, retired, and trying to find my way back to the person I once was. Elon Musk's words lit a fire in me, and now I'm digging my own tunnel out of doubt and fear." He hit publish and felt a rush of vulnerability. Would anyone read it? Would anyone care? For the next few days, Frank walked every morning, jotting down thoughts, memories, and small victories on the blog. He wrote about Helen, about his regrets and hopes, about the pain of watching the world speed past while feeling stuck in place. He shared clips of Elon Musk's speeches and how those words inspired him to believe again. Slowly, messages trickled in, comments from strangers, encouragement from people who said, "I'm with you," or, "It's never too late." Each message was like a small beam of light, pushing back the shadows. Meanwhile, Frank reached out to Sarah. He sent a careful email explaining why he was writing, why he was trying to rebuild, and asking if they could talk. The response was cautious but kind. They set a tentative video call for the weekend. The days leading up to the call were a mixture of excitement and fear. What would she think of this new Frank? Would she see the man she remembered or just an old man chasing foolish dreams? When the call came, Frank's heart pounded. Sarah appeared on the screen, her face a mixture of surprise and something softer, hope. "Dad," she said, voice trembling, "I'm proud of you. I had no idea you were feeling so alone." They talked for hours, about missed moments, misunderstandings, and a shared desire to reconnect. Sarah promised to visit soon. The smallest choice, walking daily, sharing his story, reaching out, began to rebuild bridges Frank thought were lost forever. At the garage, Frank dusted off his old tools and started a project inspired by his and Helen's long-forgotten prototype, a simple, affordable ramp to help elderly passengers get on buses more easily. It wasn't the next big thing. It wasn't a tunnel through a city. But it was something tangible. A symbol of his renewed purpose. Each day, as he worked, he listened to Musk's interviews and podcasts, letting the energy fuel his own creativity. Musk's mindset. The refusal to accept no, and the willingness to try again and again, became a quiet mantra. Frank's body ached more than it used to, but he pushed through, knowing that building anything worthwhile always came with struggle. One afternoon, as he hammered a loose board on the ramp, his neighbor Terry stopped by with a small package, a 3D printer kit. "Thought you might want to try making some parts for your ramp," Terry said with a grin. Frank laughed, a sound he hadn't made in a long time. "I haven't touched one of these since the early days at the library." With Terry's help, Frank learned the basics, printing prototype parts and testing designs. The process was slow, full of mistakes and frustration, but also breakthroughs. He was learning again. At night, Frank's blog posts grew more frequent, reflecting on the day's progress and the emotional journey he was on. He wrote about the loneliness that still lingered, the fear that sometimes overwhelmed him, but also the joy of rediscovery and connection. The blog's readership expanded slowly, bringing messages from people all over the country who felt inspired by his courage. One comment stood out: "If Frank can start at 72, what's stopping me at 65? The words hit Frank hard. He wasn't just changing his own life. He was becoming a beacon for others who felt forgotten or too old to change. Then came a moment that felt like a true turning point. At a local community center, Frank was invited to speak at a senior group meeting about his project and his journey. Standing in front of a crowd of faces that mirrored his own, lines etched by time, eyes bright with stories yet to be told, Frank felt vulnerable but alive. He spoke openly about fear, regret, and the power of small steps. He shared Elon Musk's philosophy on persistence and vision, and he told them his own story of rediscovery. The applause was warm, genuine. Afterward, several people approached him, sharing their own dreams and offering support. Frank realized he was no longer alone in his tunnel. Together, they could dig wider, deeper, and light the way for others. The days that followed brought new challenges. A letter from his bank flagged concerns about his spending on tools and materials. A skeptical friend warned him not to get his hopes up. His body reminded him of its limits with aches and fatigue. But Frank met each obstacle with a growing resilience. He was learning that change wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence, about refusing to give up even when the path was unclear. One evening, as he sat on the porch with a cup of tea, Frank opened a message from Sarah with photos of her new baby daughter. Granddaughter. The word felt strange but wonderful. Tears pricked his eyes as he whispered, "I'm coming to see you soon." He looked up at the stars, thinking about tunnels, about journeys, about the invisible paths we carve in the darkness. Elon Musk had shown the world how to dig through the impossible, and Frank had learned how to dig through his own fears. The ramp project was far from finished, and the tunnel under the city still a distant dream, but the spark was alive. Frank Dalton was no longer waiting for permission to matter again. He was living it. Frank Dalton sat in his garage late one evening, the soft hum of the 3D printer filling the quiet space as the small machine meticulously created parts for his ramp project. The air smelled of sawdust and warm plastic, a scent that had somehow become comforting in this second act of his life. He had spent weeks perfecting designs, testing materials, and writing blog posts that told the story of a man rediscovering purpose well past what many would consider the prime of life. Tonight felt different. There was a sense of anticipation buzzing under his skin, as if something was about to change in a way he hadn't dared hope for. Earlier that day, his phone had buzzed with a notification he wasn't expecting, a message from a well-known local journalist who had come across his blog. "Your story is inspiring. Would you be open to sharing it with a wider audience?" The email was brief but clear, and Frank stared at the screen, heart pounding, unsure if he was ready for the spotlight. Could a man his age, chasing a small dream inspired by Elon Musk's bold ventures, really matter beyond his quiet neighborhood? The next morning, he called the journalist, Margaret, and agreed to meet at a local cafe. Sitting across from her, Frank was nervous but honest. He told her about the years of silence and regret, about the moment he'd heard Musk say, "You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when you're done." He talked about the blog, the ramp project, and the tentative reconnection with his daughter Sarah. Margaret listened intently, her eyes reflecting a mix of empathy and admiration. The interview lasted over an hour, and by the time they parted, Frank felt a strange blend of exhaustion and exhilaration. Days later, the article was published online under the headline, "At 72, Frank Dalton digs deep to rebuild a life and inspire others." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers across the country, older adults who had been waiting for a sign, families who saw their parents or grandparents in Frank's story, people who felt too old but found new courage in his example. One comment stood out, "Frank's journey reminds me that age is a number, not a limit." The attention brought unexpected challenges. Some questioned whether Frank was risking his health. Others dismissed his ramp project as too small to matter. But Frank learned to let the noise wash over him, focusing instead on the messages that lifted him up. One afternoon, his phone rang. It was Sarah. "Dad, I saw the article," she said softly. "I'm so proud of you." They talked longer than usual, sharing hopes and regrets, and planning a visit. For Frank, it felt like a breakthrough, not just public recognition, but the rekindling of family ties he feared were lost forever. Meanwhile, the ramp project gained traction. Local community centers expressed interest, and Terry helped Frank organize a small team of volunteers. Together, they refined the design, making it easier to manufacture and install. The once-forgotten garage became a hub of activity, laughter, and shared purpose. Frank marveled at how the simple act of building had transformed his days, replacing loneliness with connection and despair with hope. One evening, after a long day of work, Frank sat on his porch and read a message from a woman named Linda, who had installed one of the ramps in her town. "Thank you for giving us independence again," she wrote. "Your work is changing lives." Tears welled in Frank's eyes. This was what mattered, not fame, not recognition, but the impact of small actions rippling outward. Inspired by Musk's example of relentless innovation, Frank began dreaming bigger. What if his ramp could be just the beginning? What if he could inspire others to start their own projects, their own tunnels through fear and doubt? The idea sparked a new blog series, Digging Deeper, where Frank shared stories of others finding purpose later in life. The community grew, a network of dreamers refusing to fade quietly. One night, Frank received a call from Sarah. "Dad, I want you to meet someone," she said. When they arrived at her home, Frank met his granddaughter, Emma, a bright-eyed toddler clutching a stuffed rocket. "She loves space," Sarah laughed. "Maybe she'll be the next Elon Musk." Frank smiled, feeling a surge of hope. The past still weighed on him, but the future was alive and wide open. The inner war was far from over, but Frank had broken through the darkest parts of himself. He was no longer just surviving, he was thriving, building a new legacy from the ground up. And in the quiet moments, when he listened closely, he could still hear Musk's voice urging him forward, reminding him that the only way out of the tunnel was through it. Frank Dalton sat quietly on the porch swing, the gentle creak of the chains mingling with the evening breeze as the sun dipped low behind the trees. The world felt softer somehow, less sharp around the edges that had once made him feel invisible and forgotten. He had come a long way from those first tentative steps, from the days when every breath felt heavy with doubt and the fear that his best years were behind him. Now, as twilight settled, he felt something new taking root deep inside, a sense of peace, purpose, and unexpected pride. The ramp project was no longer just a personal mission, it had become a movement. Volunteers from nearby towns reached out, eager to help build and install the ramps that were giving seniors a chance at independence and dignity. Frank's blog had blossomed into a community where stories of late-in-life reinvention were shared like precious jewels, each one sparkling with hope and courage. And through it all, Elon Musk's example lingered, not as a towering figure overshadowing Frank's journey, but as a quiet guide lighting the way. Musk had shown the world that limitations were meant to be challenged, that failure was a step toward success, and that age was no barrier to dreaming boldly. Frank thought about the day he first heard Musk's words, how they had pierced through years of silence and resignation. "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again," he whispered to himself, feeling the truth of those words settle like a warm embrace. Sarah's visit had been a balm to his soul. Seeing her face, holding Emma in his arms, reconnecting across the years, it reminded Frank that legacy wasn't just about what you build or create, but about the lives you touch and the love you share. One afternoon, while organizing materials in the garage, Frank found an old photo of Helen. Her smile, radiant and full of life, seemed to reach out from the past, urging him forward. He placed the picture carefully on the workbench, a silent promise that he would carry their dreams with him, no matter what. The challenges hadn't disappeared. His body still reminded him of its limits with aches and fatigue, and the world outside sometimes whispered doubts and dismissals. But Frank had learned to stand firm, anchored by the knowledge that change was a process, not an event. He found strength in the small victories, the emails from grateful recipients of his ramps, the messages from readers inspired to start their own projects, the moments of connection with family and friends rekindled. Frank's days were full but peaceful. Mornings began with walks that felt less like a struggle and more like a celebration of movement. Evenings ended with writing or calls to new friends from the blog community. He was living proof that the end of one chapter could be the thrilling beginning of another. The community center invited him to lead workshops on aging with purpose, and Frank embraced the role with humility and enthusiasm. Sharing his story in person, looking into the eyes of those who thought they were too old to change, he saw reflections of his own fears and hopes. "You don't have to wait for permission," he told them. "Your time is now." On one such evening, as he spoke to a group of seniors gathered around a worn table, a woman approached him afterward. Her name was Grace, a retired teacher with a spark in her eye that reminded Frank of himself. "Your story gave me the courage to dust off my paintbrushes," she said softly. "I'm starting my art classes next week." Frank smiled, feeling the ripple of impact spreading further than he had imagined. The blog continued to grow, and with Terry's help, Frank began a podcast where he interviewed others who had found new purpose later in life. Each episode was a testament to resilience and reinvention, a chorus of voices singing against the silence of invisibility. As the years passed, Frank's work gained attention beyond his neighborhood. Invitations came from cities and organizations wanting to learn about his ramp designs and community-building efforts. He traveled a little, always careful with his health, but eager to share his message, that age was not a cage but a canvas. One winter morning, as snow blanketed the streets, Frank sat by the window sipping tea and reflecting on his journey. The quiet house was filled with photos of family, sketches of projects, and letters from readers. He realized that what had once felt like an ending was truly a beginning. "I thought it was the end," he mused, "but it was just a new beginning." The legacy he was building wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about connection, courage, and the refusal to let time define worth. His final blog post that day was a simple but powerful message: to anyone feeling forgotten, invisible, or too old to change, remember this: you are the author of your story. The page is yours to write. Don't wait for permission to matter. Your time is now. As the sun set, casting golden light across the porch, Frank looked up at the stars, feeling the vastness of possibility stretching before him. The tunnel he had once feared was no longer dark and confining. It was a path he had carved himself, one filled with light, hope, and the promise of tomorrow. And as he closed his eyes, he heard, just faintly, the echo of Musk's voice, bold, unyielding, and full of belief. "Keep going. The future belongs to those who dare." Frank smiled, knowing that this new legacy was his to hold, and to share with the world. Frank Dalton never imagined that his small steps toward change would create waves reaching far beyond his quiet Detroit neighborhood. The Ramp Project, born from a simple desire to help seniors regain independence, had grown into something bigger, a movement inspiring people across cities and states to dig deep and defy the expectations of age and circumstance. It all started with a single blog post, a handful of volunteers, and the relentless belief that transformation was possible at any stage of life. Now, as Frank stood at the local community center surrounded by a group of new faces eager to join the cause, he felt the familiar hum of purpose pulsing through him. Among them was Grace, the retired teacher who had found her passion again through painting, and Michael, a former mechanic turned mentor for young people interested in trades. They shared stories of their own tunnel moments, the dark stretches of doubt and loneliness that had once seemed insurmountable. Frank listened, each story a reminder that he wasn't alone, and that this ripple effect was exactly what Musk's vision had sparked within him. The city council had recently approved funding to install ramps in more senior centers and public spaces, citing Frank's project as a model for community-driven change. Volunteers from neighboring towns had reached out, eager to start their own initiatives. The blog and podcast had grown into platforms where stories of late-life reinvention were celebrated daily. Emails poured in from people who felt inspired to take their own one small step towards something new, a dance class, learning to code, reconnecting with estranged family. Frank was amazed by the diversity of dreams and challenges. One letter from a woman in rural Ohio struck a particular chord. She wrote about how Frank's story had given her the courage to start a community garden, creating a space where older adults could gather, share, and grow together. "You reminded me that it's never too late to bloom," she wrote. The metaphor resonated deeply. Frank realized that their collective journeys were not just about rebuilding individual lives but about cultivating a garden of hope in a world too quick to overlook the value of experience and wisdom. The ripple effect extended even further when a local high school invited Frank to speak to students about perseverance and reinvention. Standing before a sea of young faces, some skeptical, some curious, Frank shared his story candidly, the regret of missed moments, the fear of fading into invisibility, and the spark that Musk's words had ignited. He spoke about tunnels, not just the literal ones Elon Musk was building under cities, but the invisible tunnels everyone digs within themselves, the struggle to find light when life feels dark. The students listened, some nodding, others leaning forward with unexpected attention. Afterward, several approached him, sharing their own fears about the future and asking how to find courage. Frank smiled, realizing that the lessons of resilience and hope were universal, crossing generations. Meanwhile, Sarah and Emma's visits became more frequent, bridging the gap that years of distance had created. Watching his granddaughter grow, fascinated by space and rockets, Frank felt a renewed sense of legacy, not one written in blueprints or ramps alone, but in love and connection passed down. One chilly evening, as Frank helped Emma with a puzzle shaped like a spaceship, he thought about how Elon Musk's audacity had sparked his own journey. Musk had dared to dream of tunnels and rockets when many said it was impossible, just as Frank dared to reclaim purpose when the world had told him to slow down or give up. The metaphor of the tunnel had shifted from a symbol of confinement to a symbol of passage, through fear, doubt, and age into new beginnings. The blog's community held virtual meetups where members shared progress, challenges, and encouragement. It was a lifeline for many who felt isolated, a place where stories of transformation were met with empathy and inspiration. Frank often found himself amazed by the courage displayed in those online gatherings, knowing firsthand how hard the first step could be. He had become a quiet leader, a guide for those still wrestling with their inner wars. Yet Frank remained humble, always reminding the community that the spark came from within each individual, inspired but never replaced by Musk's example. The movement was about reclaiming agency, about saying, "I matter. I can still change. I can still contribute." One day, an unexpected opportunity arrived. A local nonprofit focused on senior wellness invited Frank to collaborate on a citywide initiative promoting active aging and community engagement. They wanted to feature his ramp project and the stories from his blog as a centerpiece. The partnership promised to bring resources and visibility to the cause, turning a humble garage project into a catalyst for systemic change. Frank hesitated at first, overwhelmed by the prospect. But then he remembered Musk's words about pushing through fear and uncertainty, about building the future despite doubts. With Terry's support, he agreed. The initiative launched with a community event that brought together seniors, volunteers, city officials, and local media. Frank spoke from the heart, sharing not just his story but the collective strength of those who refused to fade quietly. The crowd erupted in applause, and Frank felt tears prick his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from a deep sense of fulfillment. The ripple effect was real. Small steps taken in hope were transforming lives, communities, and mindsets. Frank's story was no longer just his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt too old, too tired, or too lost to try again. He had become a living testament to the power of radical thinking and the courage to challenge limitations. Late one night, as he reviewed messages from his blog community, Frank paused on a letter from a man named Robert, who had started a small technology workshop for seniors interested in learning new skills. "Your story gave me the push to start this," Robert wrote. "It's amazing to see people light up when they realize they can still grow, still create." Frank smiled, feeling the warmth of connection stretching across the miles. He typed back, "Keep digging. The tunnel is long, but the light is worth every step." The seasons changed, and with them, Frank's project evolved. What began as a simple ramp had sparked a network of initiatives, each one a thread weaving together a tapestry of late-life empowerment. Frank understood now that the journey was ongoing, not a destination, but a continuous unfolding of possibility. The ripple effect, like the tunnels Elon Musk dreamed of, was about creating pathways where none existed, breaking through barriers both visible and invisible. Frank Dalton had transformed not only his own life but the lives of countless others. And in doing so, he had rewritten the narrative of aging, from a story of decline to a story of courage, connection, and endless potential. As he closed his laptop one evening, Frank looked out over the quiet neighborhood, stars twinkling overhead. The journey was far from over, but the path ahead was bright. With every step, every story shared, every life touched, the ripple effect would continue to grow, proving that it is never too late to start digging toward the light. Frank Dalton stood at the edge of the city park, the crisp morning air filling his lungs as he watched a group of seniors gather for a Tai Chi class led by Grace, the retired teacher who had become one of the movement's most passionate advocates. The sun filtered softly through the trees, casting long shadows that danced with the slow, deliberate movements of the class. Frank felt a surge of gratitude and awe. Just months ago, he had been a man trapped by fear and regret, doubting if any change was possible after 70. Now, surrounded by people rediscovering their strength and purpose, he saw a new horizon stretching wide open, filled with promise and possibility. His own life had transformed in ways he could hardly have imagined. The RAMP project had blossomed into a network of community initiatives. The blog had grown into a hub for stories of reinvention. His podcast reached listeners across the country, amplifying voices of resilience and hope. And yet, despite the momentum, Frank knew that this was only the beginning. He felt a restless energy stirring inside him, the same spark he had first felt when hearing Elon Musk speak about daring to dream beyond limitations. Musk's relentless drive to push boundaries, to build tunnels and rockets when others saw obstacles, had become a symbol of what was possible, no matter one's age or circumstances. That spirit pushed Frank to look beyond his neighborhood and even his state. What if the ripple effect could become a wave, sweeping across the nation? What if seniors everywhere could reclaim their power, rewrite their stories, and create new legacies? The idea took hold like wildfire. Frank began reaching out to community leaders, nonprofits, and even tech innovators to explore partnerships that could expand access to resources for older adults eager to take on new challenges. He imagined workshops on everything from digital literacy to creative arts, spaces where people could connect, learn, and grow together. One afternoon, as Frank sat with Terry in the garage-turned-innovation hub, they sketched plans for a new program called New Horizons. The name captured the essence of their vision, a program dedicated to helping seniors explore new skills, find new passions, and build new connections. They imagined mobile workshops traveling to rural towns, online classes for those unable to leave home, and mentorship programs pairing older adults with younger generations. The project felt ambitious, but Frank knew that Musk's example had taught him that boldness was necessary for real change. The first step was a pilot program in Detroit, a city that had shaped Frank's life and still held a special place in his heart. They partnered with local libraries and community centers, gathering volunteers and experts willing to share their time and knowledge. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Seniors signed up to learn everything from photography to coding to woodworking. The energy was electric. People who had once felt invisible now stood tall, eager to embrace new possibilities. Frank often found himself moved to tears watching the transformations unfold. There was Helen, a former nurse who took up painting for the first time and found joy in colors and shapes she had never dared explore. There was Jim, a retired factory worker who learned to build model airplanes and discovered a new sense of accomplishment. The stories poured in, each one a testament to the power of reinvention and the human spirit. News of the pilot program reached local media, and soon Frank was invited to speak on radio shows and community panels. His message was simple but profound: it's never too late to explore, to create, to connect. Your horizon is only limited by the boundaries you choose to accept. Despite the growing attention, Frank remained grounded. He knew that the work was about more than recognition, it was about creating real, tangible opportunities for people to find meaning and joy in the years they might have thought were behind them. One afternoon, Frank received an unexpected email from a representative at a national foundation focused on aging and innovation. They had heard about New Horizons and wanted to discuss funding and collaboration possibilities. The news was exhilarating and daunting. With support, the program could expand rapidly, reaching communities across the country. But with growth came challenges. Logistics, coordination, and maintaining the personal touch that made the initiative so powerful. Frank and Terry spent long nights strategizing, balancing ambition with practicality. They reminded each other of Musk's persistence, his willingness to face setbacks and keep moving forward. Meanwhile, Frank's relationship with Sarah deepened. They shared stories, meals, and plans for the future. Watching Emma grow, curious and bright, fueled Frank's desire to leave a legacy of hope and courage. One evening, Sarah surprised him with a letter she had written, addressed to Emma. In it, she spoke of resilience, of the importance of dreaming big, and of the incredible grandfather who had shown her what it meant to keep going, no matter the odds. Frank felt a lump in his throat as he read the words. Legacy, he realized, wasn't just about projects or achievements, it was about the values passed down, the courage to face the unknown, and the love that bound generations together. As the pilot program's first year drew to a close, Frank stood before a crowd gathered at the community center for a celebration. Volunteers, participants, families, and supporters filled the room, their faces alight with pride and hope. Frank shared the stage with Grace, Michael, and others who had become pillars of the movement. He spoke of tunnels and horizons, of the courage to step into the unknown and the strength found in community. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. It wasn't just for him, it was for every person who had dared to begin again. Later that night, as Frank sat alone in the quiet of his home, he reflected on the journey. The road had been long and sometimes lonely, marked by moments of doubt and fear. But looking back, he saw how each challenge had been a stepping stone, each setback a lesson. He thought about Elon Musk, the visionary who had inspired him to dig deeper and dream bigger. Musk's relentless spirit had been a spark, but the fire came from within. Frank felt a deep sense of gratitude, for the chance to rewrite his story, for the connections he had made, and for the horizon still waiting to be explored. The future stretched out before him, wide and full of possibility. The journey was far from over, but Frank Dalton was ready. New horizons beckoned, and he was eager to step forward, one bold step at a time. Frank Dalton's momentum felt unstoppable as the New Horizons program gained traction, inspiring seniors across Detroit and beyond to embrace new passions and skills. The energy was contagious, and Frank often marveled at the courage unfolding in rooms filled with hopeful faces, each one daring to rewrite their stories. Yet, just as the movement seemed poised to soar, life delivered an unexpected challenge that threatened to stall the progress and test Frank's resolve like never before. It began subtly, a lingering fatigue here, a stubborn ache there, but soon, the signs became harder to ignore. A routine checkup revealed that Frank's heart wasn't as strong as it once was. The doctor's words landed like a cold splash, "You need to slow down. Take care of yourself." For a man who had spent months rebuilding his life through tireless effort, the advice felt like a command to surrender. Frank wrestled with frustration and fear, torn between the physical limits his body now demanded and the restless fire in his spirit that refused to dim. The timing couldn't have been worse. New Horizons was entering its most critical phase, with plans for expansion and partnerships in the works. Terry and Sarah urged Frank to listen to his body, to rest and recuperate, but Frank felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. How could he step back when so many were counting on the movement? The inner war intensified. Doubt crept in like a shadow. Was he too old, too fragile, to lead now? The fear of fading into irrelevance threatened to suffocate the hope he had fought so hard to build. In these dark moments, Frank found himself returning again and again to Elon Musk's example, not as a superhuman figure but as a symbol of perseverance. Musk's path hadn't been smooth, he had faced failures, skepticism, and near bankruptcy, yet he kept pushing forward. That same relentless spirit whispered to Frank, urging him to adapt, to find a new way rather than giving up. With careful consideration and medical guidance, Frank decided to adjust his role. He would focus more on mentorship and communication, delegating physical tasks to trusted volunteers like Grace and Michael. It was a difficult transition, accepting help and acknowledging vulnerability, but Frank knew that leadership was not about doing everything alone. It was about inspiring others and building a community strong enough to carry the vision forward. At the same time, the challenge sparked innovation. The team began exploring virtual workshops and digital platforms to reach seniors who couldn't attend in person, creating new avenues for connection and learning. Frank's podcast episodes shifted to include interviews with healthcare professionals, emphasizing wellness and self-care alongside reinvention. The movement evolved, becoming more inclusive and adaptable. Yet, the emotional toll was real. There were days when Frank felt isolated by his condition, moments when the fear of decline loomed large. He confided in Sarah, who reminded him that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the choice to keep going despite it. Their conversations deepened their bond, grounded in honesty and mutual support. Frank's vulnerability became a powerful example to the community, showing that even those leading change face struggles. And that strength was found in embracing the full spectrum of human experience. One afternoon, during a virtual meetup, Frank shared his health update with the group. The response was overwhelming, messages of encouragement, offers of help, stories of others navigating their own challenges. The community's support reinforced the ripple effect's true power, a network of resilience and compassion that transcended individual obstacles. As Frank adjusted to his new pace, he discovered unexpected gifts. He had more time for reflection and writing, crafting blog posts that delved deeper into the emotional landscape of aging, change, and hope. He connected more intimately with individuals, listening to their stories and offering personalized encouragement. The movement took on a richer, more nuanced texture, balancing bold action with gentle care. Meanwhile, the citywide initiative continued to flourish under the stewardship of dedicated volunteers and partners. Frank's decision to step back physically did not diminish the impact of New Horizons, rather, it inspired others to rise and contribute in new ways. The challenge had forced the movement to grow beyond any one person, becoming a true community effort. One evening, as Frank sat by the window watching the city lights twinkle, he reflected on the twists and turns of his journey. The path had never been straight or easy. Each setback had tested him, each victory had been hard-won. But through it all, the lesson was clear: transformation required not just courage to start but wisdom to adapt. He thought again of Elon Musk's resilience, the way Musk faced failures not as dead ends but as lessons fueling the next attempt. Frank realized that his own story was no different. The tunnel was still there, dark in places, but the light he sought was not at the end of a straight path, it was found in the willingness to keep moving, even when the way changed unexpectedly. With renewed clarity, Frank drafted a message for his blog community: life will challenge you in ways you never expect. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in knowing when to rest, when to ask for help, and when to find new paths forward. Our journeys are not about perfection but about perseverance and heart. The message resonated deeply, sparking conversations and reflections across the network. Frank felt connected in a new way, part of a living, breathing community facing life's unpredictability together. As winter gave way to spring, Frank embraced the new rhythms of his life. He celebrated small victories, completing a blog series, hearing from participants thriving in the virtual workshops, reconnecting with Sarah and Emma. The future remained uncertain, but Frank no longer feared it. He had learned that transformation was not a destination but a continuous process of growth, adaptation, and hope. The unexpected challenge had become a turning point, a reminder that the tunnel's twists and turns were part of the journey, and that true courage was found in continuing to walk toward the light, no matter the obstacles. Frank Dalton was ready for whatever lay ahead. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? After months of navigating health challenges and adapting the New Horizons program, Frank Dalton felt a stirring deep within, a renewed sense of purpose that whispered of unfinished dreams and untapped possibilities. The pause forced upon him by his condition had opened space for reflection, and in that quiet, the embers of an old dream began to glow brighter. It was a dream he had nearly abandoned long ago, buried beneath decades of "too late" and "what's the point?" But inspired by Elon Musk's fearless vision and relentless drive, Frank dared to breathe life into it once more. The dream was to create a physical space, not just another community center or program, but a place alive with creativity, learning, and connection. A hub where seniors could gather, explore passions, and mentor younger generations. A place that symbolized rebirth and the power of second chances. Frank called it the Bridge, a name that spoke to crossing divides, between age groups, past and future, limitations and possibility. With the support of Sarah, Terry, and the growing New Horizons community, Frank began sketching plans. The Bridge would be a welcoming, vibrant space in downtown Detroit, with rooms for workshops, art studios, technology labs, and cozy corners for storytelling. It would host events, classes, and exhibitions, celebrating the wisdom and creativity of older adults. The idea ignited excitement, but turning it into reality was a daunting task. Funding was limited, and the challenges of renovating a suitable building loomed large. Frank reminded himself of Musk's example: no great venture was without obstacles. Persistence and innovation were essential. To raise awareness and support, Frank launched a campaign sharing the Bridge vision through his blog, podcast, and social media. Stories poured in from people across the country, many inspired to contribute or start similar spaces in their own communities. The campaign struck a chord, resonating with those who longed for belonging and purpose. Donations trickled in, volunteers offered their skills, and local businesses pledged support. One afternoon, a breakthrough came when a historic building became available at a discounted rate through a city revitalization program. Though it needed extensive work, the location was perfect, a symbol of renewal in a neighborhood with deep roots and rich history. Frank and his team mobilized, hosting community meetings to gather input and build enthusiasm. The project took on a life of its own, fueled by collective hope and determination. During the renovation, Frank often worked alongside volunteers, feeling the thrill of progress in every painted wall and repaired floorboard. The physical labor challenged his health, but the sense of accomplishment and camaraderie carried him through. The Bridge was becoming more than a building, it was becoming a testament to what could happen when people refused to let age define them. One day, as Frank walked through the nearly finished space, he paused in the main hall and imagined the conversations, laughter, and discoveries that would fill it. He thought about Grace leading art classes, Michael teaching woodworking, and Sarah organizing intergenerational events. The dream was no longer distant, it was real and breathing. As the Bridge prepared to open, Frank planned a grand launch event inviting participants, supporters, local officials, and media. He wanted the occasion to be more than a celebration, it was a declaration that transformation was possible, no matter the obstacles. On the day of the opening, the community center buzzed with energy. Seniors mingled with teenagers, artists displayed their work, and musicians played lively tunes. Frank took the stage to speak, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside. He shared his journey, from the despair of feeling forgotten to the courage to dream again. He spoke of Elon Musk's influence, not as a savior but as a symbol of daring to imagine what others said was impossible. The audience listened, many with tears in their eyes, as Frank declared, "We are not too old to change, too tired to dream, or too late to matter. The Bridge is proof that our best days can still be ahead." The applause was thunderous, filling the room with warmth and hope. After the event, Frank found a quiet moment with Sarah and Emma, watching the vibrant energy around them. Emma tugged his hand, eyes wide with wonder. "Grandpa, can I paint here?" she asked. Frank smiled, feeling the circle of legacy closing and opening anew. The bridge was not just his dream, it was a gift to future generations, a place where stories would be shared, passions ignited, and connections forged. In the weeks that followed, the bridge flourished. Workshops filled quickly, and new programs emerged, reflecting the community's diverse interests. Frank continued to write and speak, sharing the story of rekindling dreams and the power of never giving up. The project also attracted attention from national organizations focused on aging and innovation, opening doors for further collaboration and growth. Yet, Frank remained humble, always emphasizing that the bridge was a collective achievement, a symbol of what happens when people come together to challenge limitations and build something meaningful. Late one evening, as Frank sat in the quiet of the bridge's lounge, he reflected on the journey from despair to hope, from isolation to connection. He thought about the tunnels Elon Musk built beneath cities, breaking through barriers to create new paths. In a way, the bridge was his own tunnel, an opening forged through courage, persistence, and community. He realized that rekindling the dream wasn't about reclaiming youth but about embracing the fullness of life at every stage. It was about daring to build, create, and connect despite fears and setbacks. Frank Dalton had found a new horizon, and with it, a renewed purpose that would continue to light the way for others. The opening of the bridge marked a turning point not only for Frank Dalton but for the entire community that had rallied around the vision of reinvention and connection. As the weeks turned into months, the center became a vibrant hub where walls that once divided age, experience, and background began to dissolve. Frank watched as the space filled daily with people sharing stories, learning from one another, and forging friendships that defied societal expectations about growing older. The energy was palpable, a mix of laughter, curiosity, and quiet determination. One afternoon, during a workshop on digital storytelling, Frank noticed a young woman named Maya helping a group of seniors navigate smartphones and social media apps. Maya was a local college student majoring in communications, volunteering to gain experience but staying because of the genuine connections she formed. Frank struck up a conversation with her, intrigued by the bridge she embodied between generations. They talked about how technology, often seen as a barrier for older adults, could instead be a tool for empowerment and connection. Maya shared stories of her grandmother, who felt isolated until learning to video chat with family across the country. Inspired, Frank and Maya began brainstorming ways to expand the bridge's reach beyond its physical walls. They envisioned virtual programs connecting seniors in rural areas with mentors and peers, breaking down geographic isolation and fostering a broader community. With the help of Terry and tech-savvy volunteers, they launched a pilot virtual mentorship program pairing seniors with younger volunteers like Maya. The program flourished quickly. Participants exchanged skills, stories, and encouragement across screens, discovering that empathy and learning transcended distance. Frank received emails from rural seniors who said the virtual sessions gave them newfound confidence and joy. Meanwhile, the bridge hosted intergenerational events that grew in popularity. Teens came to learn woodworking, while retirees taught gardening and cooking traditions. Frank marveled at the unexpected friendships blossoming, proof that age was no barrier to meaningful connection. One such event brought together a local high school robotics team and retired engineers from New Horizons. The collaboration sparked innovation and enthusiasm on both sides, fueling Frank's belief in the power of shared purpose. Yet, not everything was easy. Frank faced resistance from some city officials skeptical of the center's impact and funding sustainability. There were moments when bureaucracy threatened to stall progress, and Frank had to channel Musk's boldness to navigate red tape and advocate fiercely for the bridge's mission. He learned to craft compelling proposals, build alliances, and communicate the center's value with clarity and passion. At the same time, Frank's health remained a concern, requiring careful balance between ambition and self-care. He discovered that true leadership involved not only vision but listening, to his body, to his community, and to the subtle shifts in needs and opportunities. The challenges deepened Frank's appreciation for the ripple effect he had set in motion. Each small victory, each connection made, was a thread weaving a larger tapestry of hope and possibility. During a community forum, a woman named Linda approached Frank with tears in her eyes. She shared how the bridge had helped her find purpose after losing her husband and feeling adrift. She spoke of the friendships she had built and the courage to start painting again. Her story touched the room and reminded Frank why the work mattered so profoundly. In quieter moments, Frank reflected on Elon Musk's influence, not just the man or his achievements, but the mindset of embracing risk, pushing boundaries, and refusing to accept limitations imposed by others or oneself. Musk's vision of tunnels beneath cities had become a metaphor for Frank's own journey, digging beneath the surface of fear and doubt to create pathways of connection and renewal. As the bridge expanded its programs and impact, Frank began collaborating with other cities interested in replicating the model. Virtual conferences and workshops connected leaders nationwide, sparking a movement focused on aging as a stage of opportunity rather than decline. The ripple effect spread wider, fueled by stories and shared experiences. One evening, after a particularly inspiring panel discussion, Frank sat with Sarah and Emma beneath the stars. Emma, now a curious and confident 8-year-old, asked questions about the projects and people who made the bridge possible. Frank realized that legacy was not just about what one built but the questions, values, and courage passed down. The bridge was becoming a living testament to that truth. In the face of obstacles and uncertainty, Frank had learned that progress was rarely linear. It was a journey marked by setbacks, adaptations, and unexpected connections. But through it all, the commitment to bridge divides between generations, communities, and dreams, remained steady and strong. Frank Dalton understood now that true transformation was not about breaking walls but about building bridges that allowed people to meet, learn, and grow together. The journey ahead was still unfolding, full of promise and challenge. But as he watched Maya teach a group of seniors how to record their stories, and saw Emma's laughter echo through the halls, Frank knew that the ripple effect he had sparked was alive, vibrant, and unstoppable. Frank Dalton had come to understand that transformation often begins with a single idea, one small spark that, when nurtured, could ripple outward in ways unimaginable. The bridge was living proof of that, evolving from a seed of hope into a thriving community beacon. Yet Frank knew the journey wasn't over. New challenges emerged, new dreams called. One crisp morning, as Frank prepared for a panel discussion on aging and innovation, he reflected on how Elon Musk's mindset had shaped his path. Musk wasn't just about rockets and electric cars, he was about daring to think differently, challenging the status quo, and relentlessly pursuing solutions others dismissed as impossible. Inspired by that spirit, Frank sought to cultivate that same boldness within the community. During the panel, Frank shared stories of the bridge and new horizons, emphasizing that the greatest barrier was often internal, doubt, fear, and societal narratives about aging. He challenged listeners to see aging not as decline but as an opportunity for reinvention and contribution. The response was electric, with many expressing a newfound sense of possibility. Back at the bridge, Frank introduced a new initiative called Idea Labs, spaces designed to foster creativity and innovation among seniors. The goal was simple: empower participants to develop projects that addressed community needs, leveraging their unique experiences and insights. Idea Labs became a crucible of energy and imagination. Seniors collaborated on diverse projects: urban gardening to combat food deserts, tech tutorials to bridge the digital divide, and art installations celebrating local history. Frank marveled at the creativity and drive unleashed when people believed their ideas mattered. One standout project was led by Grace, who proposed a mobile makerspace, essentially a workshop on wheels, to bring tools, classes, and resources to seniors unable to visit the bridge. With Frank's support, the team secured a small grant and began outfitting a van with woodworking tools, sewing machines, and digital tech. The mobile makerspace quickly became a symbol of adaptability and outreach, breaking down barriers and expanding the community's reach. Meanwhile, Frank continued to weave Elon Musk's lessons into his own leadership style and community teachings. Musk's ability to embrace failure as feedback, to iterate quickly, and to think big inspired Frank to foster a culture where mistakes were not feared but valued as steps toward growth. This mindset shift transformed how the bridge operated, encouraging experimentation and resilience. Alongside Idea Labs, Frank launched storytelling circles where seniors shared not only their life histories but also the evolution of their ideas, the trials, triumphs, and lessons learned. These stories forged bonds, built empathy, and inspired others to take risks and dream boldly. At one such gathering, an older man named Joe shared how his idea for a community tool library had faced skepticism but eventually blossomed into a vital resource, fostering sharing and cooperation. His story resonated deeply, a testament to the power of perseverance and community support. As the mobile makerspace rolled into new neighborhoods and Idea Labs sparked innovation, Frank saw the emergence of what he called a culture of possibility. It was a collective mindset shift, breaking the chains of limiting beliefs and inviting people to imagine new roles and futures. This cultural change radiated beyond the bridge, influencing city leaders, families, and local organizations. Yet, as always, challenges persisted. Funding constraints required constant creativity and advocacy. Frank learned to navigate these hurdles with Musk's boldness, refusing to accept no as final and seeking alternative paths. He built partnerships with universities, nonprofits, and businesses, creating a network of allies invested in the shared mission. One evening, while reviewing plans for an upcoming conference, Frank received an unexpected call from a young entrepreneur named Alex. Alex had stumbled upon the bridge's story online and was inspired to connect. He proposed collaborating on a tech platform that would allow seniors to share ideas, resources, and support nationwide, a digital extension of the community's spirit. Excited by the prospect, Frank and Alex quickly formed a partnership, blending Frank's community insights with Alex's technological expertise. The project, named RippleNet, aimed to create a virtual space where seniors could innovate, mentor, and connect across distances. Development moved swiftly, fueled by shared passion and the belief that age was no barrier to impact. As RippleNet took shape, Frank marveled at how one idea had grown into many, each branching and intersecting like a vast network of tunnels beneath a city, each leading to new possibilities. He thought of Elon Musk's relentless quest to build tunnels that would transform transportation, breaking through obstacles with vision and grit. In a similar way, RippleNet sought to break through the isolation and invisibility that so often accompanied aging, opening pathways for engagement and empowerment. The platform's launch was met with enthusiasm and curiosity. Seniors from diverse backgrounds signed up, eager to explore the tools and opportunities it offered. The community expanded beyond geographic and social boundaries, creating a dynamic ecosystem of ideas and support. Frank's own story, shared through blogs, podcasts, and interviews, inspired many to take the first step toward their own transformations. In quieter moments, Frank reflected on the journey from despair to hope, from isolation to connection. He realized that while Elon Musk's accomplishments were monumental, the true lesson was about mindset, the courage to believe in possibilities beyond conventional limits, and the tenacity to pursue them. Frank's life had been reshaped by that belief, and he hoped the bridge and RippleNet would carry that torch forward for countless others. One afternoon, as Frank prepared for a community event, he received a letter from an elderly woman in a small town in Montana. She wrote about how reading Frank's story and engaging with RippleNet had inspired her to start a local storytelling group, connecting neighbors and rekindling a sense of belonging. The letter was a powerful reminder of the ripple effect. How one idea, nurtured with courage and heart, could travel far beyond its origin. With renewed energy, Frank looked ahead to the next phase of his mission. There were still tunnels to dig, bridges to build, and ideas to ignite. The journey was ongoing, fueled by the belief that transformation was always possible, no matter age or circumstance. Frank Dalton was living proof that the power of one idea, embraced with boldness and community, could change lives, and maybe even the world. In a world cluttered with distractions and relentless noise, Frank Dalton knew the greatest challenge was making meaningful connections that truly mattered. Despite the growing success of the bridge and RippleNet, there was still skepticism, not just from outsiders, but from within. Many older adults, long habituated to being overlooked or dismissed, found it difficult to trust new ideas or believe they could still make a difference. Frank often recalled a quote from Elon Musk that resonated deeply: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." It was a mantra he shared with the community, urging everyone to keep pushing, to break through the noise of doubt and societal indifference. To amplify their message, Frank and his team organized a public forum titled Voices of Experience, designed to spotlight the wisdom, creativity, and potential of older adults. The event combined storytelling, performances, and interactive workshops, showcasing the richness that seniors brought to communities. Planning the forum was a massive undertaking, requiring outreach to local media, partnerships with nonprofits, and mobilizing volunteers. Frank leaned into the task with Musk's signature tenacity, embracing every setback as an opportunity to innovate rather than a defeat. As the day approached, anticipation mingled with anxiety. Frank wondered if the event would reach beyond the bridge's usual circle or simply preach to the choir. But when the forum opened in a bustling community center packed with diverse attendees, it became clear that something powerful was unfolding. Stories flowed, raw, honest, and inspiring. A Vietnam veteran spoke of resilience and healing through art. A former teacher shared how she had launched an after-school tutoring program with retired educators. A young entrepreneur spoke of learning leadership from her grandmother's example. The audience was moved, the air thick with empathy and newfound understanding. Media coverage followed, bringing wider attention to the bridge and the movement it represented. Local news stations aired segments highlighting seniors' achievements, while social media buzzed with hashtags like #VoicesOfExperience and #NeverTooOld. For many, it was the first time they saw aging reframed not as decline but as a chapter rich with possibility. The forum also sparked policy discussions with city officials, opening doors for increased funding and support for senior-focused initiatives. Frank found himself participating in roundtable talks, advocating for greater resources and inclusion. His message was clear: investing in older adults was not charity, it was smart, necessary, and transformative for communities. Despite the momentum, Frank remained grounded. He knew the fight against ageism and invisibility was ongoing and complex. Many elders still faced loneliness, health struggles, and financial insecurity. To address these issues, Frank collaborated with local healthcare providers, social workers, and nonprofits to create comprehensive support programs linked to the bridge. These included transportation services, health screenings, and counseling resources, helping participants overcome practical barriers to engagement. As the ecosystem of support grew, so did the stories of transformation. One woman, Martha, shared how she overcame isolation after joining a walking group sponsored by the bridge, eventually becoming a volunteer organizer herself. Another man, Carl, credited tech workshops with helping him reconnect with distant family via video calls. These personal victories were reminders that breaking through the noise required addressing both societal attitudes and individual circumstances. Frank also recognized the importance of intergenerational dialogue in dismantling stereotypes. He expanded the Bridge's youth mentorship programs, pairing seniors with students to foster mutual learning and respect. The results were heartening: young people gained historical perspective and life skills, while elders felt valued and energized by the exchange. This two-way street of learning challenged assumptions on both sides and built bridges of understanding. One memorable moment came during a storytelling exchange when a teenager asked Frank, "What's the biggest lesson you've learned about life?" Frank's answer was simple yet profound: never stop believing that you can surprise yourself. The future isn't just for the young, it's for anyone willing to keep moving forward. Around him, faces lit up with hope and determination. The momentum attracted attention beyond Detroit. Frank was invited to speak at conferences, write articles, and consult on aging initiatives nationwide. He became a voice representing a growing movement that rejected resignation and embraced possibility. Yet with visibility came new pressures. Frank struggled to balance his expanding responsibilities with health and family time. He reminded himself of Musk's emphasis on sustainable progress, knowing that burnout would serve no one. Prioritizing self-care and delegating leadership tasks became essential strategies. Late one evening, Frank sat alone in the bridge's quiet main hall, reflecting on the journey so far. He felt gratitude for the people who had joined the mission and humility about the road ahead. The words of Elon Musk echoed again. Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. For Frank, change wasn't just a necessity, it was an act of courage and hope. As he looked out at the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, Frank envisioned a future where aging was celebrated as a vital, dynamic phase of life. He imagined communities where elders were leaders, innovators, and mentors, breaking through societal noise to make their voices heard. This vision fueled his resolve. The challenge was daunting, but so was the opportunity. With every step forward, Frank Dalton was breaking barriers, creating spaces, and lighting paths that others could follow. And like the tunnels Musk built beneath cities, these pathways would open new routes, quiet, steady, but transformative, toward a future where age was not a limitation but a source of strength. Frank Dalton often reflected on the unpredictable currents of life that had brought him to this point. A place of purpose, connection, and unexpected reinvention. He understood that change was rarely a single event but a series of moments, decisions, and small acts accumulating over time. Inspired by Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of innovation and his willingness to embrace uncertainty, Frank began to embrace reinvention as a lifelong practice rather than a one-time fix. Reinvention in motion meant continually adapting, learning, and pushing beyond comfort zones even when the path was unclear. It meant refusing to be confined by age, circumstance, or past regrets. At the bridge, this philosophy came alive through dynamic programs that encouraged seniors to try new skills, explore passions, and step into roles they never imagined possible. One morning, Frank introduced a challenge series, monthly themed activities designed to stretch participants' boundaries. The first challenge, try something new. The idea was simple but powerful: encourage each person to take a small step toward a new experience, whether learning to use a smartphone app, trying yoga, or volunteering in a new capacity. The room buzzed with excitement as people shared ideas and commitments. Grace, the mobile makerspace leader, signed up to learn digital photography, while Carl, once hesitant with technology, pledged to host a virtual book club. Frank himself committed to taking singing lessons, a lifelong dream deferred by self-doubt. As weeks passed, the ripple effect of the challenge series became evident. Participants returned with stories of breakthroughs, laughter, and newfound confidence. Some discovered hidden talents, others rekindled old passions with fresh perspective. The atmosphere at the bridge shifted, becoming charged with energy and possibility. Reinvention wasn't just about individual growth, it was about transforming the collective mindset around aging. Frank noticed a shift in conversations. Phrases like, too old, or, can't do that, began to fade, replaced by curiosity and, why not? One afternoon, during a community showcase, seniors presented projects born from their challenges: handmade crafts, digital photo albums, poetry readings. The event was a celebration of resilience and creativity, with families, friends, and local leaders joining to cheer them on. For Frank, moments like these crystallized the essence of reinvention: the courage to rewrite one's story at any age. Meanwhile, Frank's personal journey mirrored this ethos. His singing lessons were both humbling and exhilarating, pushing him out of his comfort zone. He found joy not in perfection but in the act of learning and expressing himself. The vulnerability of starting anew reminded him of the risks Elon Musk took, launching rockets that often failed before succeeding. This parallel deepened Frank's appreciation for embracing failure as a stepping stone. Beyond the bridge, Frank advocated for systemic change to support lifelong learning and reinvention for seniors. He collaborated with educational institutions to develop accessible courses tailored for older adults, blending technology with personal interaction. He pushed for policies that recognized the value of seniors as contributors and innovators rather than just beneficiaries. His efforts gained traction, sparking dialogues in local government and community organizations. Reinvention also touched Frank's family life. His relationship with his daughter Emma deepened as they shared experiences of growth and discovery. Emma, now a teenager, admired her father's willingness to embrace change and found inspiration in his example. Together, they started a project documenting family stories through interviews and photos, creating a living archive of memories and lessons. The project became a bridge connecting generations and a symbol of legacy in motion. Yet reinvention wasn't without challenges. Frank encountered moments of doubt and fatigue, times when progress felt slow or setbacks painful. But he learned to lean on community, self-compassion, and the unwavering belief that every step forward, no matter how small, mattered. The support from fellow bridge members, volunteers, and family created a network of encouragement that sustained him. One particularly poignant moment came when Frank participated in a citywide talent show organized by the bridge. Nervous but determined, he performed a song he had been practicing for months. The applause and smiles that followed were not just about the performance but about witnessing the triumph of reinvention and courage. That night, as Frank looked out at the faces of people who had cheered him on, he felt a profound connection, a shared journey of transformation and hope. Reinvention in motion was no longer an abstract concept, it was lived experience. As spring blossomed, the bridge planned its biggest event yet, a reinvention festival celebrating aging as a dynamic, vibrant phase of life. The festival would feature workshops, performances, art exhibits, and talks from inspiring seniors and thought leaders. Frank envisioned it as a beacon of possibility, a public declaration that life could always evolve in new and meaningful ways. In preparation, Frank reached out to Elon Musk's team to invite him as a keynote speaker, hoping to deepen the symbolic connection between visionary leadership and personal transformation. While the invitation was tentative, the gesture itself energized the community, sparking conversations about dreaming big regardless of age. On the day of the festival, the city's cultural center overflowed with visitors of all ages. The air was alive with creativity and celebration. Seniors shared their reinvention journeys, volunteers guided newcomers, and families explored exhibits showcasing achievements and possibilities. Frank took the stage to deliver opening remarks, his voice steady with conviction. Reinvention is not about turning back the clock but about moving forward with courage, curiosity, and heart. We are proof that the story of our lives is never finished. Every chapter can surprise us. The crowd erupted in applause, a chorus of voices united in hope and determination. As the festival unfolded, Frank saw firsthand the transformative power of embracing reinvention in motion, how it lifted spirits, forged connections, and ignited dreams. The event became a milestone, a declaration that aging was a journey of growth, contribution, and endless possibility. In the quiet moments that followed, Frank felt a deep sense of gratitude, for the community that had embraced change, for the lessons learned from Elon Musk's example, and for the chance to keep moving forward. Reinvention in motion was a dance between past and future, a commitment to embrace uncertainty with courage and joy. It was a journey without a final destination, a continuous unfolding of potential and purpose. And Frank Dalton was ready to lead it, one bold step at a time. Frank Dalton had come to understand that some of the most profound transformations in life came from unexpected connections, moments when paths crossed and sparked something new, something neither party had anticipated. His journey with the bridge and RippleNet had already shown him the power of community and shared purpose, but this chapter of his life was about to deepen in ways he hadn't foreseen. It began on an ordinary Tuesday when Frank received an email from a woman named Linda Matthews, a former aerospace engineer in her late 60s living in a small town in Ohio. She had stumbled across RippleNet and was intrigued by the idea of seniors collaborating to innovate and share knowledge. Linda's message was simple but heartfelt. She wanted to offer her skills to the community and wondered how she might get involved. Frank responded quickly, sensing the potential for a meaningful partnership. They arranged a video call, and as they spoke, Frank was struck by Linda's sharp intellect, passion, and eagerness to contribute. She spoke of her years working on satellite systems and the frustrations of retirement that felt more like exile from the field she loved. Their conversation sparked an idea. What if the bridge could host a series of tech talks, where seniors with specialized knowledge could share insights, mentor others, and even collaborate on projects? Linda eagerly agreed to lead the first session. The tech talks became an instant hit. Participants, many of whom had never thought of themselves as tech-savvy, found new confidence learning from peers who spoke their language. Linda's sessions were engaging and approachable, blending technical expertise with warmth and humor. The talk sparked curiosity and collaboration, leading to projects like developing apps for senior wellness and digital platforms for community engagement. This unexpected connection not only enriched the bridge but also gave Linda a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. She flourished as a mentor and leader, inspiring others to step forward with their own expertise. Meanwhile, Frank continued to weave Elon Musk's lessons into this new phase of growth. Musk's insistence on cross-disciplinary thinking and bold experimentation resonated with the collaborative spirit blossoming at the bridge. Frank encouraged participants to embrace failure as feedback and to see innovation as a collective journey rather than a solo pursuit. One afternoon, during a tech talk, Linda shared a story from her aerospace days about a project that initially failed but ultimately led to a breakthrough. The room was silent, absorbing the lesson that setbacks were integral to progress. The message struck a chord, especially with those hesitant to try new things. As the tech talks expanded, so did the network of connections. Professionals from various fields, medicine, education, engineering, arts, volunteered to share their knowledge, creating a vibrant ecosystem of learning and creativity. Frank marveled at how this mosaic of experiences transformed the bridge into a hub of intergenerational wisdom and innovation. The ripple effect extended beyond the community. Local schools invited bridge members to speak, sharing stories of careers, challenges, and reinvention. Students were captivated by tales of perseverance and discovery, gaining perspective on aging as a dynamic journey. In turn, younger generations brought fresh ideas and tech-savvy skills, fostering mutual respect and collaboration. Frank saw firsthand how these unexpected connections were breaking down barriers and reshaping societal narratives. Amid these developments, Frank's relationship with Linda deepened into a genuine friendship rooted in shared values and curiosity. They exchanged books, debated ideas, and often reflected on how their own reinventions had been sparked by chance encounters and willingness to reach out. Their partnership symbolized the transformative power of connection, the way openness and trust could create new pathways for growth. Yet, the journey wasn't without challenges. As the network grew, coordinating activities, managing resources, and maintaining focus required careful balance. Frank and his team worked tirelessly to ensure inclusivity and sustainability, always mindful of Musk's principle to focus on the mission's core purpose amid distractions. One day, as Frank reviewed plans for a major collaborative project between the bridge and a local university, he received an unexpected call. It was from a representative at Elon Musk's office, acknowledging Frank's work and inviting him to participate in a symposium on innovation and aging hosted by one of Musk's organizations. The invitation was a validation of the movement Frank had nurtured and a chance to connect with like-minded visionaries on a larger stage. At the symposium, Frank found himself among thinkers, entrepreneurs, and advocates pushing the boundaries of what aging could mean. He shared stories of the bridge's growth, the power of unexpected connections, and the lessons learned from Musk's ethos of boldness and perseverance. The audience responded with enthusiasm, sparking dialogues that promised future collaborations and support. Returning home, Frank felt energized and humbled. The experience reinforced his belief that change was never isolated, it was woven through relationships, ideas, and shared commitment. The unexpected connection that had started with Linda had blossomed into a movement reaching far beyond Detroit. Back at the bridge, Frank and Linda launched a new initiative called Innovation Circles, small groups focused on tackling community challenges through creative problem solving. These circles combine diverse skills and perspectives, embodying the spirit of collaborative reinvention. Projects ranged from developing sustainable gardening programs to creating digital platforms for elder advocacy. Each success, no matter how small, fueled enthusiasm and confidence. Frank often reminded the groups that Elon Musk's journeys were filled with obstacles, but his relentless drive came from believing that even the impossible was worth pursuing. This mindset empowered participants to push boundaries and dream boldly. As innovation circles multiplied, Frank noticed a beautiful pattern. Seniors who once felt isolated were now leaders and collaborators, their voices shaping solutions and inspiring others. The community was not just surviving, it was thriving, energized by the unexpected connections that had become its lifeblood. One evening, as Frank closed the doors to the bridge, he paused to reflect on how far the journey had come. From despair to hope, from isolation to vibrant community, the transformation was profound. The unexpected connections, nurtured with openness and courage, had rewritten narratives and built bridges across generations and disciplines. Frank felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had crossed his path, the lessons learned from Elon Musk's example, and the unfolding future filled with promise. He knew the journey was ongoing, with new connections yet to be made and new horizons to explore. But one thing was certain: when people dared to reach out, to listen, and to share, transformation was inevitable. And that was the greatest breakthrough of all. Frank Dalton had long understood that persistence was more than stubbornness, it was a steady, unwavering commitment to a vision despite obstacles, setbacks, and doubts. Watching Elon Musk's career unfold, rockets exploding on launch pads, electric cars facing skepticism, and tunnels digging beneath cities, had been a masterclass in persistence. Musk's willingness to fail, learn, and try again fueled Frank's own determination. He often reflected on Musk's words: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. These words echoed in Frank's mind during the toughest moments of his journey with the bridge. Early on, launching the community center had felt like an uphill battle. Funding was scarce, volunteers few, and many elders remained skeptical or resigned to the belief that their time to make a difference had passed. Frank faced criticism from some local officials who doubted the project's viability and from family members who worried about the strain on his health. But each time the path grew difficult, Frank reminded himself of persistence as an act of faith, a belief that what he was building mattered, even when immediate results were invisible. This mindset shaped the culture of the bridge. Volunteers and participants embraced challenges as part of growth rather than reasons to quit. Setbacks in funding or attendance were met with renewed strategies rather than despair. Frank cultivated a community where persistence was celebrated as a core value, a collective muscle strengthened over time. One of the most poignant examples came from a participant named Joe, a retired carpenter who had struggled with mobility after a stroke. Joe's initial hesitation gave way to determination as he joined the bridge's physical therapy group. His progress was slow and often frustrating, but his persistence inspired others. Months later, Joe surprised everyone by leading a group hike in a nearby park, a symbolic victory of body and spirit. Frank used Joe's story as a beacon, showing that persistence was not about speed or perfection but about refusing to stop moving forward. Persistence also guided Frank through his personal reinvention. Learning to sing was filled with awkward moments and self-doubt, but he kept practicing, embracing each stumble as part of the process. He thought of Musk's journey with SpaceX, how repeated rocket failures led to eventual success. This perspective transformed failure from a source of shame to a teacher's lesson. At the bridge, persistence fueled innovation. When an early digital literacy workshop struggled due to participants' lack of confidence with technology, Frank and his team redesigned the program to be more hands-on and paced gently. Attendance grew, and the workshop became one of the most popular offerings. Frank realized that persistence also meant listening, adapting, and being patient with the process and the people involved. The power of persistence extended beyond the bridge to broader advocacy efforts. Frank and his colleagues tirelessly engaged with policymakers, presenting data, sharing stories, and advocating for resources. They faced bureaucratic delays, competing priorities, and skepticism but remained steadfast. Over time, their efforts resulted in increased funding and support for senior programs, a testament to the cumulative power of persistent voices. Frank's belief in persistence was tested when a severe storm damaged the bridge's main building. Faced with the prospect of closure, the community rallied, organizing fundraisers, repair crews, and donations. The crisis became a catalyst for renewed energy and commitment. In rebuilding, the bridge upgraded its facilities with accessibility features and new technology, turning adversity into opportunity. Throughout these trials, Frank stayed grounded in Musk's mindset of long-term vision and resilience. He reminded everyone that transformation was rarely linear and that setbacks were part of forging a stronger foundation. Persistence was the bridge between vision and reality. On a personal level, Frank learned to balance persistence with self-care. There were times when pushing too hard led to exhaustion and stress. Drawing on lessons from Musk's emphasis on health and focus, Frank prioritized rest, mindfulness, and time with family. This balance allowed him to sustain his efforts without burning out, modeling healthy persistence for the community. The impact of persistence was perhaps most evident in the emerging leaders within the bridge. Inspired by Frank's example, many participants took on leadership roles, spearheading projects, mentoring others, and advocating in their neighborhoods. This ripple effect ensured that the spirit of persistence was not confined to one person but woven into the community's DNA. Frank often reflected on the words of a friend who had once said, "The difference between those who succeed and those who don't is often just the willingness to keep going." For Frank and the bridge, persistence was a beacon of hope, a force that transformed dreams into tangible realities. As the community celebrated the third anniversary of the bridge, Frank stood before a crowd of participants, volunteers, and supporters. His speech was simple but powerful: persistence is our foundation. It's the quiet force that turns challenges into triumphs and moments of doubt into breakthroughs. Together, we've proven that it's never too late to build, to learn, to grow, and to make a difference. Let's keep moving forward, no matter what. The applause that followed was not just for Frank but for every person who had embraced persistence and contributed to a movement redefining aging. Frank Dalton's journey, inspired by Elon Musk's fearless determination, was a testament to the power of persistence. It was a reminder that the greatest transformations often come not from sudden breakthroughs but from the steady, unwavering commitment to keep going when the world says stop. In the quiet moments that followed the celebration, Frank looked out at the city skyline, imagining the tunnels Musk was building beneath the streets, paths carved through obstacles, connecting distant points. That image captured the essence of persistence, the relentless effort to create new routes, new possibilities, and new futures, even when the way seemed blocked. Frank was ready to keep digging, keep building, and keep moving forward. Persistence wasn't just a strategy, it was a way of life. And it was lighting the way for a new era of aging, innovation, and hope. Frank Dalton had come to see failure not as an enemy but as an essential part of growth, a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. This mindset shift was one of the most profound lessons he had absorbed from following Elon Musk's journey. Musk's ventures, whether it was the early faltering rockets of SpaceX or the challenges Tesla faced in disrupting the auto industry, were marked by high-profile failures that the media often sensationalized. Yet beneath the headlines was a deeper truth: failure was a necessary part of innovation and personal transformation. For Frank, embracing failure meant shedding the fear that had held him back for years, the fear of looking foolish, of disappointing others, or of confirming his own doubts about whether change was possible at his age. It was a hard lesson to learn, especially in a culture that often equated aging with decline and closure. But seeing Musk's resilience inspired Frank to reframe failure as freedom, the freedom to experiment, to take risks, and to be imperfect without losing dignity or hope. At the bridge, this philosophy became a guiding principle. Frank encouraged participants to approach new challenges with curiosity and openness, not fear of mistakes. The community created a safe space where setbacks were shared openly and turned into collective learning experiences. One memorable example was during a robotics workshop where a group of seniors built simple programmable robots. The first few attempts ended in frustration, the robots didn't move as intended, code failed, and machines toppled. Instead of giving up, the group laughed, analyzed errors, and iterated. By the end of the workshop, they celebrated small victories, a robot moving forward, then turning, then navigating an obstacle course. The process was messy, imperfect, and full of setbacks, but the joy of discovery overshadowed any disappointment. Frank often reminded the group that Musk's repeated rocket failures didn't mark defeat but fueled breakthroughs that eventually led to successful launches and innovations that changed space travel forever. This example gave participants permission to let go of perfection and embrace the freedom to fail and try again. Frank's personal journey with singing lessons was another arena where embracing failure proved transformative. Initially embarrassed by his shaky voice and forgotten lyrics, he almost quit several times. But each time, he chose to lean into vulnerability, reminding himself that the goal was expression and growth, not perfection. Over time, the act of singing, even imperfectly, became liberating, a metaphor for shedding the constraints of self-judgment and fear. This internal shift rippled outward, influencing how Frank led the bridge. He introduced Fail Forward Fridays, a monthly gathering where participants shared stories of mistakes, lessons, and unexpected outcomes. These sessions became a highlight, filled with laughter, empathy, and inspiration. People realized that failure was not the end but a vital part of the path to success and fulfillment. The impact of embracing failure extended beyond individual growth to community resilience. When the bridge faced funding cuts one year, the team experimented with new fundraising approaches, from social media campaigns to community events. Some efforts faltered, but each attempt generated insights that improved future strategies. This adaptive persistence helped the bridge survive and thrive in challenging times. Frank also integrated Musk's concept of first principles thinking into the community's problem-solving approach. Instead of accepting limitations at face value, participants learned to break down problems into fundamental truths and rebuild solutions from the ground up. This mindset encouraged creativity and risk-taking, fostering an environment where failure was a natural and valuable part of innovation. In his advocacy work, Frank began speaking openly about the importance of normalizing failure, especially for older adults. He challenged societal stigma that equated failure with decline or incompetence, arguing that embracing failure was crucial for lifelong learning, resilience, and joy. His message resonated widely, sparking conversations in local media, policy forums, and social groups. This shift helped dismantle barriers to participation and encouraged more seniors to engage boldly in new endeavors. Frank's relationship with his daughter Emma deepened as they shared experiences of embracing failure. Emma, navigating the uncertainties of adolescence, found comfort and strength in her father's openness about mistakes and growth. Together, they created a family tradition of failure stories dinners, where they laughed and learned from missteps, strengthening bonds and fostering mutual support. This practice became a symbol of freedom. The freedom to be human, fallible, and striving. One particularly transformative moment came when Frank invited Elon Musk's team to visit the bridge for a workshop on innovation and resilience. The day was filled with candid conversations about the realities of failure, the courage to persist, and the joy of discovery. Musk's representatives shared behind-the-scenes stories of setbacks and comebacks, inspiring participants to view failure as a gateway to freedom rather than a trap. This visit ignited new energy and ideas, reinforcing the community's commitment to embrace risk and imperfection. As the bridge prepared for its upcoming Reinvention Festival, Frank emphasized the theme of freedom through failure in his speeches and workshops. The festival showcased projects born from trial and error, art installations that evolved through multiple iterations, entrepreneurial ventures that pivoted in response to challenges, and personal stories of transformation fueled by resilience. Attendees left the festival energized and empowered, carrying the message that failure was not a mark of shame but a celebration of courage and possibility. In quiet moments, Frank reflected on how embracing failure had changed his life. He realized that freedom came not from avoiding mistakes but from welcoming them as teachers and companions on the journey. This freedom allowed him to dream bigger, live more fully, and lead with authenticity and grace. Frank Dalton's embrace of failure was a powerful testament to the transformative power of mindset. Inspired by Elon Musk's fearless experimentation and relentless drive, Frank helped rewrite the narrative of aging from one of decline and fear to one of freedom, creativity, and endless possibility. Failure was no longer something to hide but a beacon lighting the way forward, a reminder that the greatest breakthroughs often emerge from the courage to try, stumble, and rise again. Frank Dalton understood that transformation was not just about personal growth, it was deeply tied to relationships, especially those that had frayed or broken over time. Inspired by Elon Musk's example of bold communication and relentless pursuit of goals, Frank realized that reaching out to rebuild bridges could be one of the most courageous acts a person could undertake, particularly for those in their later years who carried regrets and wounds from the past. For years, Frank had carried a quiet ache about his relationship with his estranged brother, Michael. They had grown apart over decades, hurt by misunderstandings, distance, and unspoken grievances. Like many siblings, their bond was layered with love, competition, and disappointment, but the silence between them had become a chasm. One afternoon, after a stirring talk at the bridge about Musk's fearless approach to confronting challenges head-on, Frank felt a surge of resolve. He decided to send Michael a letter, raw and honest, acknowledging the years lost and expressing a desire to reconnect. The act of reaching out felt vulnerable yet liberating. The letter was met with hesitation at first, but Michael responded with openness and cautious hope. Their reunion was arranged in a quiet cafe, a neutral ground filled with nervous anticipation. The meeting was not without awkward moments and old pains resurfacing, but beneath it was a shared longing for reconciliation. Over hours of conversation, laughter, tears, and memories, they began to rebuild the bridge that had long been broken. This personal journey echoed through Frank's work at the bridge. He introduced Bridge Builders, a program encouraging participants to reach out to estranged family, friends, or old acquaintances, sharing stories, forgiveness, and healing. The program created a safe space for vulnerability and reflection, guided by principles of empathy and courage inspired by Musk's candid leadership style. Many participants found this process transformative. Stories poured in of reunions with long-lost siblings, reconciliations with adult children, and renewed friendships once thought lost. The emotional weight lifted from these acts of reaching out was palpable, as people discovered that mending relationships was both possible and deeply healing. Frank often reflected on the power of connection, how it transcended age and time. Rebuilding bridges was not about erasing the past but embracing it with honesty and compassion, allowing new chapters to unfold. At the bridge, this healing ripple extended to community partnerships. Frank facilitated dialogues with local organizations and leaders who had previously been skeptical or indifferent to senior initiatives. By reaching out with openness and persistence, Frank forged new alliances that expanded resources, visibility, and impact. These collaborations enriched the bridge's offerings and demonstrated the collective strength of unity. The concept of rebuilding bridges also influenced Frank's advocacy work. He engaged policymakers with stories of real people healing wounds and forging connections, advocating for programs that supported social and emotional health for seniors. His message emphasized that aging was not just about physical health but about nurturing relationships and community bonds. This holistic perspective gained traction and contributed to policy shifts supporting elder engagement and support networks. On a personal level, Frank's renewed relationship with Michael became a source of joy and reflection. They shared stories of their youth, dreams deferred, and lessons learned, discovering common ground and mutual respect. Their renewed bond was a testament to the possibility of healing even long-standing wounds. The process also deepened Frank's understanding of forgiveness, not as forgetting or excusing but as choosing freedom from bitterness and opening space for love. Inspired by Musk's example of bold risk-taking, Frank extended his outreach beyond family to include old friends he had lost touch with, former colleagues, and neighbors. Each reconnection brought new perspectives, stories, and opportunities for collaboration. These reunions often sparked ideas for community projects and initiatives that enriched the bridge and its mission. One such reconnection was with Karen, a former schoolteacher who had moved away years earlier. Reuniting with her led to the launch of an intergenerational storytelling program where elders shared life stories with local students, preserving history and fostering empathy across ages. This program became a beloved part of the bridge, illustrating how rebuilding bridges could create lasting community impact. Frank often emphasized to participants that reaching out was a form of courage that could transform not only relationships but also self-perception. The act of making the first move, of risking rejection or discomfort, was itself a victory. It was a reclaiming of agency and hope. As the bridge continued to grow, Frank witnessed the profound impact of these rebuilt connections. Participants reported increased feelings of belonging, reduced loneliness, and renewed purpose. The community became a living tapestry of healed relationships and shared futures. In quiet moments, Frank reflected on the metaphor of bridges, structures that spanned divides, connected disparate points, and carried the weight of passage. Like Musk's tunnels beneath cities, bridges symbolized possibility and connection amid obstacles. Frank understood that rebuilding bridges in life was a continuous process requiring courage, patience, and openness. It was a journey of risk and reward. Frank's story of reaching out and rebuilding bridges became a beacon for others who feared that past wounds were too deep to heal or that time had passed to make amends. He showed that the willingness to try, to speak, and to listen could open doors to unexpected renewal and joy. In embracing this journey, Frank not only transformed his own life but also enriched the lives of countless others, embodying a legacy of connection, resilience, and hope. And as the sun set over Detroit, casting golden light over the city's bridges and streets, Frank felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. The bridges he and others were rebuilding were more than structures, they were lifelines to a future defined by love, courage, and unbreakable bonds. Frank Dalton stood on the threshold of a new chapter, both personally and for the bridge community he had nurtured through years of perseverance, learning, and connection. Inspired by Elon Musk's relentless drive to push boundaries and redefine what was possible, Frank felt an electrifying sense of possibility humming beneath the surface of everyday life. Musk's ventures, from electric cars that challenged the automotive status quo to rockets aimed at Mars, were emblematic of a mindset that refused to accept limitations simply because they were long-standing or comfortable. This refusal to settle was exactly the energy Frank wanted to harness for himself and the seniors he served. For decades, society had framed aging as a gradual retreat, a slow fading away into irrelevance. Frank had witnessed firsthand how this narrative seeped into the minds of older adults, whispering that dreams were past and change was out of reach. But as Frank's community grew, that narrative was cracking. Seniors were launching businesses, learning new skills, advocating for themselves, and rewriting their life stories with bold strokes. The future was no longer a distant, unreachable place but something unfolding right now, in real time, in Detroit and beyond. Frank reflected on one recent breakthrough. A group of seniors had successfully developed an app designed to connect neighbors for shared rides, errands, and companionship. The project was born out of frustration with isolation and transportation challenges, but through collective brainstorming, trial and error, and the persistence Frank championed, it had become a viable, empowering tool. Watching these innovators at work reminded Frank of Musk's first principles thinking, breaking problems down to their core and rebuilding solutions from scratch without assumptions or limitations. It was a mindset that encouraged not just innovation but liberation from conventional thinking. Frank also embraced Musk's emphasis on dreaming big but acting practically. The bridge wasn't just about lofty ideas, it was about grounded steps forward. Whether it was a new wellness program, an advocacy campaign, or a creative workshop, each initiative was carefully planned, executed, and iterated on. This balance of vision and action became a hallmark of the community's success. The message Frank shared in his speeches and workshops was simple yet revolutionary: age is not a barrier to innovation, reinvention, or impact. He urged his audience to embrace curiosity, embrace failure, and dare to imagine futures that may have seemed impossible before. This shift in mindset was powerful, sparking a wave of new projects, collaborations, and initiatives emerging from the bridge. The impact reached beyond individuals to influence local policies and cultural attitudes. Frank worked alongside city leaders to design programs that leveraged seniors' talents and wisdom in workforce development, education, and civic engagement. These efforts challenged outdated stereotypes and built bridges between generations. In his personal journey, Frank felt the pulse of possibility more keenly than ever. His singing had evolved from a tentative experiment to a source of joy and community connection. His relationships, rebuilt and strengthened, added depth and meaning to his days. He had learned to embrace uncertainty as a canvas for creation rather than a threat. One evening, as Frank prepared for a keynote speech at a national conference on aging and innovation, he reflected on how far he and his community had come. The audience would include policymakers, entrepreneurs, activists, and elders from across the country, people united by a shared vision of redefining aging. Frank knew that this moment was a culmination of many small steps, failures, breakthroughs, and the courage to keep moving forward. He prepared to share stories of real people transforming their lives, communities harnessing the power of persistence and connection, and the importance of embracing failure as a pathway to freedom. Frank's vision for the future was clear: a world where seniors were not sidelined but celebrated as vital contributors to society's evolution, where innovation was not the province of youth alone but a lifelong pursuit, where community was strengthened by the bonds of empathy, respect, and shared purpose. This vision was already taking shape in Detroit, thanks to the efforts of the bridge and its resilient members. Frank thought about Elon Musk's own words: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." This conviction had fueled Musk's ventures and now fueled Frank's mission. Age was no longer a limiting factor. It was a stage rich with experience, wisdom, and untapped potential. As Frank looked out over the city skyline from his office window, he saw more than buildings and streets. He saw a tapestry of possibility, a network of tunnels and bridges, real and metaphorical, connecting people to opportunity, purpose, and one another. The future was unfolding, and it belonged to those bold enough to redefine it. The Bridge's annual Innovation Challenge was a testament to this new era. Seniors proposed ideas ranging from green energy solutions tailored for senior housing to digital storytelling platforms preserving local history. The energy and creativity were palpable, echoing the spirit of Musk's ventures in scale and ambition. Frank felt a surge of pride and humility witnessing this transformation. It was a reminder that the future was not something to wait for but something to build, starting now, with courage and collaboration. In quiet moments, Frank often pondered what it meant to live fully in the present while dreaming of the future. He realized that embracing possibility required letting go of fear, cynicism, and limiting beliefs. It meant recognizing that transformation, personal and societal, was a continuous journey shaped by choices and mindset. This insight fueled his dedication to the bridge and its mission to empower seniors to live boldly and creatively. Frank's message resonated beyond his immediate community. Invitations to speak at conferences, contribute to policy discussions, and collaborate on research projects grew. He became a recognized voice in the movement to redefine aging, a living example of the power of mindset and action. As Chapter 19 drew to a close, Frank stood before a packed auditorium, feeling the electric hum of shared possibility. His words echoed, "The future is now. It belongs to us all, no matter our age. Let's redefine what's possible by daring to dream, daring to act, and daring to believe that the best chapters are still ahead." The applause was thunderous, but for Frank, the real victory was in the faces before him, bright with hope, determination, and readiness to seize the future. Inspired by Elon Musk's example and fueled by his own journey, Frank Dalton had helped ignite a movement that was changing the narrative of aging from one of decline to one of dynamic possibility. The future was indeed now, and it was limitless. Frank Dalton stood at the edge of a quiet park bench overlooking the Detroit River, the late afternoon sun casting warm hues across the water's surface. The city skyline glimmered in the distance, a testament to transformation and resilience, much like Frank's own journey. He reflected on the years that had passed since the moment everything changed, that pivotal instant when a spark, one inspired by Elon Musk's fearless vision and relentless pursuit of innovation, had lit a fire within him. Now, Frank understood that his story was no longer just his own. It was a legacy, a thread woven into a greater tapestry of lives reimagined and renewed. He had once believed aging meant fading into the background, an inevitable slide toward invisibility and regret. Yet, through trial, connection, courage, and countless small acts of rebellion against limitation, Frank had rewritten that narrative. Aging had become a canvas for reinvention rather than a curtain call. The Bridge community stood as living proof, seniors embracing change, reaching beyond fear, and discovering purpose anew. This legacy was not about fame or fortune but about inspiring others to reclaim their power and creativity at any stage of life. Frank's thoughts drifted to the countless faces he had encountered: Mary, who rekindled her passion for painting after decades of silence, Samuel, who launched a tech startup at 72, and countless others whose lives had been transformed by a shift in mindset and the courage to act. Their stories were Frank's true inheritance. A chorus of voices breaking the silence of invisibility. As he watched a group of young families and seniors mingling in the park, sharing stories and laughter, Frank felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The bridges built over years, between generations, estranged loved ones, and fractured communities, were no longer fragile but strong and enduring. Frank recalled his conversation with Elon Musk's team during their visit to the bridge. Musk's message had been clear: it's never too late to innovate, to challenge norms, or to build something meaningful. That belief had propelled Frank through moments of doubt and fear, reminding him that the only limits that mattered were those we accepted. Frank's own transformation had taught him the power of permission, the permission we often wait for to matter, to try, to change. He realized that this permission came from within, fueled by belief and action. I was never too old, he would say to audiences now. I was just waiting for permission to matter again, and I gave it to myself. The legacy Frank hoped to leave was one of empowerment and possibility. He envisioned a future where society valued the contributions of elders not just in nostalgia but as active, vital forces shaping culture, technology, and community. The Bridges programs, advocacy, and innovations were blueprints for this vision, models that others could replicate and expand. As the sun dipped lower, Frank's phone buzzed with a message from his daughter, Emma. She was sending a photo of her recent visit with Michael, Frank's brother, smiling broadly as they explored a local museum together. The message was a reminder that healing relationships had blossomed into new traditions and memories, a gift more precious than any accomplishment. Frank smiled, knowing that his journey of reaching out and rebuilding bridges had ripple effects far beyond his own heart. His singing voice, once shaky and uncertain, now filled community halls and gatherings with joy and connection. The arts program he had helped launch at the bridge was flourishing, bringing creativity and expression to many who thought their time for dreaming had passed. The future Frank once feared was an empty and lonely place had become a vibrant landscape of ongoing growth and possibility. He remembered the early days when fear and self-doubt almost stopped him from stepping forward. Those moments were still real, but they no longer held power over him. Instead, they were chapters in a larger story of resilience, courage, and transformation. Frank understood that this story was still being written, not just by him but by every person who chose to embrace change, to reach out, to fail forward, and to dream boldly. As twilight settled, Frank's thoughts turned to the words he would share in the keynote speech at the Bridge's upcoming anniversary celebration. He planned to remind the community that legacy was not a distant concept reserved for the end of life but a living, breathing force cultivated every day through choices and actions. Legacy was about showing up, taking risks, nurturing connections, and inspiring others to do the same. It was about making the intangible tangible, hope, courage, love, into a force that shaped the future. Frank's legacy was also deeply personal. He wanted his story to be a beacon for anyone who ever felt too old, too broken, or too invisible to matter. He wanted them to see that life could be reimagined at any age, that purpose and joy were not exclusive to youth, and that transformation was a lifelong gift. The journey wasn't always easy, there were setbacks, fears, and moments of loneliness, but each step forward was a triumph. Frank knew that his greatest achievement was not a single project or accolade but the community he had helped build. A community that lifted each other, celebrated imperfection, and dared to dream beyond conventional limits. As night fell and stars began to appear, Frank felt a quiet peace settle within him. The city lights twinkled below, and the river's steady flow reminded him that life was continuous, ever-changing, and full of possibility. The moment was a reminder that every ending was also a beginning, a new chapter waiting to be written with courage and heart. Inspired by Elon Musk's visionary spirit and his own journey of reinvention, Frank Dalton had discovered that the true legacy was not what we leave behind but what we live and share today. And in that truth, he found freedom, fulfillment, and an unshakable hope for the future. The new legacy was clear: a life reimagined, a story rewritten, and a future embraced with open arms. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?